Hey guys, this is Jordan with Hardy House Games. Today we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite card deck building games, Dominion. Dominion is all about designing your deck to be more efficient than everybody else's, and in this video I'm going to show you exactly how to do that so you can win and make everyone hate you. So before I get too far into it, I should point out that Dominion is an extremely expansive game with all sorts of intricate game strategies and its own terminology with things like slogging and junking attacks, sifters, dead cards. It's a lot. You can get lost for hours upon hours in the Dominion Wiki site just trying to wrap your head around each strategy for each specific card. If you want to do that, I've got a link to the wiki down below. So with that in mind, there is no way I'm going to be able to really dig deep into all of the strategies related to Dominion. What I can do though is provide you overarching strategies that should work most of the time in most of your Dominion games. Perhaps in the future, if this video does well, I'll make videos on each one of the expansions and the strategies related to those as well. So when I play Dominion, I like to think of it in three different phases. I think of it in the early phase, the mid game, and the late game. Because there's so much that goes into mid and late, as well as early, I broke it into two videos. So this first video is going to go over strategies for the early game, right when you start. One of the first things you should do when you start a game of Dominion is get a lay of the land. Look at every single one of the cards that are in play. Too often I see players just kind of jump into a game without really knowing what's out there on the table. And obviously that's not going to work very well for you. You need to know what cards are there so you can build a strategy right from the beginning. And that's a key component of a good Dominion game. You need to have a strategy from the very beginning. You can't just kind of buy a little bit of this, buy a little bit of that, and hope it works out. No, you need to actually have a course of action you're going to take based on the cards that are on the table. So when you're looking at the cards on the table, look for cards that have synergies with one another. These are cards that feed each other and are stronger together than they could ever be by themselves. To give an example, just using some of the base cards, the Council Room and the Cellar actually work really well together. The Council Room draws 4 cards for you, and the Cellar lets you discard any number of cards and then redraw that amount of cards. So for example, suppose you had enough actions just to play 2 Council Rooms and you happened to draw 1 Cellar. You now have control over those 8 cards you drew from the Council Rooms to sift through, discard anything that's not helping you very much, and redraw cards that are hopefully more useful to you. The next early game tip that I have is to purge your deck if it's possible. Now what I mean by that is removing the low power cards that ultimately are not very good for your engine. Those are estates, because you can't use them for anything, as well as coppers. Now I know some of you may think that coppers are great because they're money, and in the early, yeah, you need them to buy cards, but at the end of the day they're very weak and you would like to get them out of your deck and replace them with more valuable cards like silvers or golds. Think of it this way, each turn you generally only start with 5 cards, and if they're coppers and estates, you're never really going to get a ton of purchasing power. So get rid of those coppers as soon as it makes sense to do so. And of course there are exceptions to this rule. Sometimes you might want to keep coppers and estates for more advanced strategies related to things like gardens where you need a large deck, or barons where estates help, but a general rule of thumb is to try to get rid of these weak cards. From there you want to buy scalable cards. These are cards, I'm sure there's a better term that Dominion uses, but these are cards that let you chain actions into actions. They scale to larger turns for you. Villages and the whole class of village cards are a great example of this. They give you 2 additional actions while drawing another card, allowing you to start beefing up your turns and playing several actions at once. Another example of scalable cards are ones that let you draw cards like smithies or council rooms, the ones that give you larger power in your turn. With that in mind, I've seen a lot of new players make one simple mistake where they have tons of action cards in their deck but not enough ways to play them. For example, if your deck has 3 or 4 smithies in it and no way to gain additional actions, it's common for you to draw hands in which you can only play 1 action even though you have 4 actions. So you want to make sure that your deck has plenty of things like villages in it. So the Smithy card is an example of what we call a terminal action card. They don't provide you any additional actions, so they could be the last action of your turn. A rule of thumb I like to follow is a ratio of terminal action cards to non-terminal action cards. I never want so many terminal action cards in my deck that it would be impossible for me to play my whole deck if given the chance. To put that into simple numbers, if you have 2 smithies, you should probably have at least 1 village, so that you can play both of those. But better yet, I like to keep it about 50-50. Half of my action cards are non-terminal, ideally village ones that give you 2 actions, and maybe the other half are terminal action cards. This way you never find yourself drawing a hand where you have too many action cards and you can't play them all. You gotta make sure you have plenty of village type cards that are going to replenish your action ability each turn. You want to play through all of your deck on your turn if you can pull it off. When you do this, you have greater buying power, you're more likely to buy the big victory cards. Because think about it, if you can play through your entire deck, you're gonna have a ton of money on the table. Hopefully there are cards that give you additional buys, and through playing your entire deck, which is totally possible if you have enough action replenishing cards, you'll be able to buy multiple powerful victory cards at the end of the game. Another tip I have for the early game is avoid buying victory cards. I know it can be tempting. You could say, hey, I've got 5 coins, I could buy a duchy right now, but that duchy is going to get in your way, especially in the early game. I mean, think about it. At the beginning, you only have 10 cards in your deck, so each card is a high percentage of your deck, and you're going to draw it frequently at the beginning. This is why in the beginning, you need those scalable cards. You need actions that chain into other actions early on. And those are kind of my tips for the early game of Dominion. I would say early game would be when your deck is below 20 to 25 cards. Obviously, every game is a little different, and maybe you want to move into the mid to late game strategy sooner than that. And of course, that depends on what your opponents are doing, how quickly they're moving. It's a very reactive game in that way as well. So what you define as early game is highly dependent upon how quickly those victory cards start disappearing. And those are my basic tips just for the early game of Dominion. Make sure you understand what all the cards on the table do, find cards that work really well together, fill your deck with action cards that replenish more actions so that you can start building the kind of engine that is going to cycle through many cards on your turn. By doing this in mid to late game, you're going to be more likely to have a lot of purchasing power and be able to buy those large victory cards before your opponents do. So those are my early game strategies. Obviously, there's a lot more to the game. I have mid and late game strategies in the follow-up video. Hopefully the thumbnail is up here, and let me know your thoughts on early game strategies in the comments below. What have you found to be super useful? Have there been crazy games where you did something totally bizarre and it worked super well? Let us know. And if you like this video, consider subscribing so that you can find other strategy videos, get better at board games, win all the time, and make all of your friends hate you.